Ahoy! Today we're talking about Loki. More specifically, we're talking about how to play Loki after his rework. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about his current performance, his current playstyle and everything surrounding that, and I wanted to clear some things up and give you a straightforward guide on how to play him. First, I quickly need to clear one thing up. Loki is not inherently worse than he was before his rework. If you look at his statistics, he's actually performing slightly better in Conquest than before, while being massively more popular, meaning a lot of people that not only don't play Loki are playing him at the moment, so he is probably still slightly better than before. As we can't separate by stats for the bonus updates, this is also including the stats from right after he was released, so if we only had the stats from the bonus update, his performance would probably go up even more, because he got some pretty substantial buffs that should increase his performance. We can also see in his stats that his kills and assists went up, meaning he is a better team fighter than he was before, and maybe a worse split pusher at the same time. So what is Loki now? He is still a burst assassin and he will remain that way. He has a large amount of burst regardless of the changes to his abilities. But he switched from being a split pusher to being more of a distraction during team fights as a secondary purpose. He brings lots of utility now for your team, and the setup is tied with his own high damage, so he doesn't inherently rely on teammates to work with the setup, but he can make things easier for them. I'm gonna do a very quick ability rundown here, but it's just gonna be a brief one. If you want more details, just read them in the description. This is just to make sure you don't miss out on any important points of them. His passive gives him increased backstab damage when hitting enemies from behind. His first ability, Vanish, is a stealth with slow immunity and a 35% movement speed increase. It also buffs your next basic attack and gives it a damage over time effect. This ability has a 15 seconds cooldown, but it already ticks down during the 4 second stealth duration, so effectively the cooldown will often feel shorter. It's his main mobility and escape tool with high single target damage. Second ability is Agonizing Visions, a 4 second AoE that can be placed on the ground with a 12 second cooldown. This deals low tick damage and applies 5% damage reduction per tick of the ability with a maximum of 4, so 20%. And when it reaches 4 stacks on an enemy, it also blinds the enemy and gives you a 3 second backstab effect that counts all of your attacks as backstabs. His third ability is Flurry Strike, a 2 second cone channel ability that has a 12 seconds cooldown. The initial flurry hits deal relatively low damage and apply a 15% slow for 3 seconds that refreshes but doesn't stack. The last hit deals higher damage and comes with a 30% slow for 3 seconds. During the channel of the ability, you are knock up and knock back immune, and the ability can proc your backstab passive. His ultimate is Assassinate. This is a high mobility damage ability, a teleport, that has 2 instances of attacks now. The first is a single target hit that deals high damage and cripples the enemy, and shortly afterwards is a cone attack that reaches a relatively wide radius and applies a 1 second stun. This comes with a 90 seconds cooldown. Now, mechanics wise, there's something very important I want you to note with Assassinate that I think a lot of players are doing wrong at the moment. If you teleport to a target and you hit them with the initial strike, there is a good chance they will try and juke the secondary attack, maybe run towards you or run off to the side, and they can get away. There is a trick that makes it incredibly hard for them to get away unless they have insanely high movement speed. And that is, as soon as the first part of your ultimate hit, you press whichever key makes you walk backwards. This way, they are in a much wider cone area because the cone spreads out the further you are away from Loki, which makes sense, that's just how cones work, and you can almost guarantee that you will hit the secondary strike of the ultimate. This feels a little bit counterintuitive at first, and I still forget sometimes, because typically you would want to get close to an enemy when you apply CC to them so that you can get more basic attacks off, but it is actually more beneficial because the stun becomes more reliable and then you can still close the distance quickly enough afterwards anyways. I tested this a fair bit in jungle practice, and even when the person being attacked anticipates the ultimate, it is very, very hard to avoid as long as the Loki backpedals immediately. Next, let's have a look at the leveling order. Now we're going to look a little bit at solo and jungle separately because they work a little bit differently. One discussion that is currently going on regarding solo is if you want to max the 2 first or the 3 first. Both of them deal AoE damage, but one of them hits the full wave, the other one hits half of the wave and does a little bit more damage to them. Typically you find yourself using both the 2 and the 3 while clearing a wave, so the scaling isn't really important, you're gonna apply all the scaling anyways, but the base damage is. And I crunched the numbers for that just to make sure that I actually get this right. With the 2, we can hit all 6 targets, and maxing it increases the base damage by 5 per level. If we apply that across all ticks and all targets, that is 220 damage that we get extra per rank. Again, across all targets, sounds like a lot. If we max a 3 instead, then the formula looks a little bit different because we are talking about the initial tick, which is increased by 9 per hit, and then we have the last hit, which is increased by 25 per hit. But as this has less ticks overall and hits less targets, we come out with a total of 210 damage increase. Both abilities have the same cooldown and mana cost, so it's a really close race here. Keep in mind that with the 3 you can apply backstab damage, which can increase this a little bit further, and you can also use it better to punish the enemy because you can kind of hit into your own wave. On the other hand, the 2 doesn't require you to even get close to the wave and is a much safer clearing tool. It also means you don't have to stay with the wave if a wave is already relatively low, or you have the ability maxed out and have built some power items, and you can rotate out earlier. So there are definitely benefits to both, and I think it mostly depends on if you are looking to box with the enemy solo laner more, or if you just want to safe clear as much as possible. So all in all, I would really say this one is down to personal preference, and both have their ups and downs. I personally prefer maxing the 2 because it forces the enemy to stay out of their own wave a little bit more. It has a little bit more zoning potential in that regard, but really both are very justifiable. Now in jungle things look a little bit different. One conversation that we have to first is the ultimate versus the 1. Maxing the ultimate increases the damage by 80 per rank across both parts of the hit, while one of the parts is a little bit easier to prevent. Maxing the 1 on the other hand increases your base damage by 60 per rank across the ticks. Now there are definitely many things going in favor of the 1 here, because the 1 has a much shorter cooldown, sometimes you can even use it twice per fight, and it comes with almost the same damage, and enemies are less likely to use their Aegis to prevent part of the damage, for example. But on the other hand, with the ultimate, you can apply that damage to multiple targets, so if you get a strong ultimate off in a team fight, while having the higher base damage, it will obviously have significantly higher impact. So I find myself maxing both depending on the situation, depending on how many team fights are already going on, and yeah, it's very flexible here as well. And flexibility is really a big keyword when it comes to his leveling out in jungle other than that as well. The one thing that is consistent is that you want to max out the 3 first for clear. In the jungle you're only going to hit 3 targets, so the 3 does way more damage than the 2, so that's going to be the first ability you want to max, and now with its buff it's actually a pretty good fighting tool as well. What you max after that completely depends. If you're looking for a lot of early ganks and engages, then you definitely want to max the 1 / the ultimate. Again, that's up to you. I will not discuss the ultimate here further. Whenever you want to level the ultimate is when you level it. But you want to level the 1 before the 2 if you're looking for aggressive plays. On the other hand, if it's not going that well for your team, or if you're just looking for a lot of quick farm, especially by rotating through lanes and just dropping your decoy there and then getting back out of there, then maxing the 2 is also completely justifiable. Having the option to clear out most of a wave very quickly without having to stay in a lane for long is something that can be very beneficial in farm heavy metas, and right now farm is pretty up there when it comes to the importance in a match. So again, down to playstyle as long as you max the 3 first. Loki's combos are pretty straightforward. You want to engage with the 1 whenever possible really, because it gives you the stealth to get close to them and applies extra damage. You want to follow that up with a basic attack, and the first combo then would be going into the 3 to apply the slow to an enemy, use another basic attack and then drop your 2. At that point they are already slowed, so the blind effect is more likely to be applied, and that would help you with any backstab damage afterwards. You can also put multiple basic attacks in between if you want to maximize the time that you are able to stick to an enemy. Just depends on how many tools they have to get away from you and how much burst you think you have at that point. At the same time, you can also use a combo where you engage with the 1 but use a basic attack, use a 2, a basic attack and then a 3, because that way you have some extra damage applied quicker though you will often not get the blind applied to them at that point. It can also be beneficial to completely hold on to your 2 and just keep it until the enemy used their escape and then place it on them to apply some more damage. In team fights, the 2 can also just be dropped as a zoning tool or to deny an area. If an enemy responds to your engage by trying to fight into you, then you should definitely drop your 2 so that you can apply the damage reducing effect to them. A way to secure the blind from your 2 is to use your ultimate after you dropped your 2 on a target while they're still in the area to stun them there, but that comes with some downsides as well, because you're probably going to lose out on some attack cancels if you're not doing this quickly enough. Especially if you're using Hydras, it's just a little bit less beneficial sometimes, and also you're sacrificing a lot at that point just to apply the blind effect, which is not inherently going to guarantee a kill or anything. And that brings us to items, which in my opinion are more interesting than ever when it comes to Loki. The items that stay really consistent for jungle are Assassin's Blessing, Warrior Tabai, and likely one of the mace variations, one of the red maces. When it comes to solo, that's not inherently a given. It depends a lot on what direction you want to go in. You could go with Warrior's Blessing for a more bruiser focused build. You could start an early Transcendence if you just want to get ahead in terms of stacking. So both are options, though at this point I don't really prefer Transcendence on Loki in general anymore. Then when it comes to the maces, you can basically build any of them. Crusher is fantastic to apply more damage effects, which is especially easy with his 2, so there's a lot of synergy there. With Brother's Beatstick, you have the anti-heal, which is also very easily applied, and with Jotun's Wrath, you have the cooldown reduction, which he benefits from a lot. I would generally try and get Jotun's Wrath in at some point. Often I build that early and then go into a secondary option after that, because it's just very good to have some cooldown reduction on this heavily ability focused character, and especially to use your stealth multiple times in a fight when you can. There's honestly nothing wrong with building all 3 of these items if you want to go for a very easy and simple build, just to get a lot of flat pin going and have a lot of nice effects for yourself as long as anti-heal is needed. Another very highly used item on Loki is of course Hydra's Lament. I think it's a little bit harder to use than before due to the way that the 3 works and due to the way in which you have to utilize the 2 better, where you can't just use it as a free Hydra setup all the time anymore, but rather have to make more calculated decisions regarding the placement. But that doesn't mean that the item is bad now. It's most certainly still a very effective item to use on him. In order to keep your burst up in later stages of the game, Heartseeker is absolutely fantastic, especially if the enemy is building some health, some defense, anything along those lines. Erendite is also a great item on Loki in my opinion. I know some Loki players really keep their ultimate for escaping only. If that's your playstyle, then Erendite is not for you. But I do think that with how the ultimate works now, that's a waste of the ult. The ult has such good setup now, and following that up with the bonus damage from Erendite, plus the extra mobility in a team fight, in my opinion, is a very good thing. Especially if you have your stealth up at that point, you can zoom to the next enemy right after. I also think that Bloodforge is more justifiable on Loki than ever before. You just benefit so much from getting that shield, and it's much more likely that you're going to be able to follow up with multiple kills and get that extra movement speed now. I always thought this was a good item on Loki, but now it's even better than it ever was. If we're looking at late game items, Titan's Bane and Serrated Edge are most certainly 2 that need to be considered because they come with that 20% pen. Now I do think that both of them have their purpose on Loki. Titan's Bane gives you the chance to deal higher damage with your first ability, which if it's your 1 is still a lot of damage, or if it's your ultimate it's still a lot of damage. It just depends really. The problem is that it can happen that you can utilize it with your 2, and at that point you're actually losing out on a lot of damage, and I am somebody who likes to place the 2 a lot to zone, so for me this is not the preferable one. Serrated Edge on the other hand comes with a little bit less overall damage output in some situations, even though the passive still works pretty well for Loki. And it also comes with movement speed, which I think is great for him because of the engage potential from stealth being slightly higher. And as we're already talking about penetration options as well as some lifesteal options, Soul Eater is also an interesting choice for Loki. I don't think this is a core item, especially not for jungle Loki, but it can be interesting especially when implemented in solo builds for some sustain in the earlier stages, while still coming with good overall stats. And this shifts us a little bit more towards the solo builds in general. And here I want to make an important point. I think that there's a lot more value in going bruiser build on Loki than there was before. Not only do you have a channeled ability that kind of requires you to survive a little while, but also comes with the benefit of knockback and knockup immunity, which means you can box into enemies longer, but you also have your 2, which applies damage reduction effects to the enemy, so they deal less damage to you, and that means that you benefit from combining that with other bruiser items, and it makes you a lot more survivable overall. And then factor in that he has stealth with slow immunity. He has a lot of immunities in his kit and a lot of mobility tools and a lot of damage reduction, survivability tools that really work well together and make me think that, especially after the slow buff, Bruiser Loki has more of a purpose. There are some items that apply for both jungle and solo. The first one is Shifter's Shield, which I think is just a great item on him now because the high power but some added defense value, especially if you need to get out. There's Magi's Blessing, obviously always a good tool to avoid even more CC. And there is Mantle of Discord, which allows you to escape when it's most necessary, which is always nice in combination with his stealth. But then for solo specifically, you can go into other CDR options. You can, for example, go into Breastplate of Valor or Genji's Guard if you want to. You again can consider Soul Eater. You can most certainly consider Gladiator's Shield, which comes with a lot of stats that are beneficial for Loki specifically. Again, you can also consider Shifters here. And you can even consider options like Pridwin. If you use your ultimate to engage and to set up, and then you go straight into the Pridwin shield with the additional slow, that is great setup for your team and that makes you fill the niche of a solo character a little bit more. There are plenty of other defensive options that you can choose depending on the situation. You can also most certainly look towards aura items for your team and everything else. I don't need to explain that into much detail. You are probably familiar with ability-based soul laners at this point anyways. Anything that comes with some cooldown, some power and some defense, those are your main options really that you want to look at, or some health of course. Another item that's worth noting here that I've been testing out a little bit is Runeforged Hammer, because the effect is applied during his ultimate as well as his 3, so you can actually get a decent amount of damage amplification for that as well, which carries over to the other abilities because the slow lasts so long. So all in all, there are a lot more interesting build choices that can be considered both for a jungle Loki as well as a solo Loki that I think are worth looking into. And that is it for this Loki guide. I hope this gives you a better understanding of what you can do with the character now and how you can play him, while also noting that I think Loki may still be getting some buffs. We'll have to see how his performance is stat-wise after everything settles down, but I'm guessing he might be getting buffed a little bit more, unless his full teamfight potential just ends up showing way more in the SPL, for example. We'll have to find out about that. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you're new to the channel, feel the sub button and maybe the bell so you get notified of any upcoming Smite and other content. And other than that, I hope to see you for the next one soon. ZiSotto, out.